If you are a U.S. citizen and you have a child that is not a U.S. citizen and you want to know how to get them citizenship, well, let's talk about it in this video, because you may not even know this. Your child may already be a U.S. citizen. They just don't have proof of it. So we'll talk about the 3 ways that a U.S. citizen can give citizenship for their child, or at least have proof of citizenship for their child. And if you wait to the end, I will give you a tip on how you can still get citizenship for a child, even if they are already over the age of 18. I am U.S. Immigration Attorney Lilian Chukwurah, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the U.S. immigration law system. Now, let's talk about giving your child citizenship. If you are a U.S. citizen, you know that if you have a child in the U.S., your child is automatically a U.S. citizen just by the fact that they were born in the U.S. But what happens if your child was not born in the U.S.? That's really what we're going to talk about in this video. There's 3 ways to do that. The first option that would be available to a U.S. citizen is the CRBA, which is the Consular Report of Birth Abroad. I have a whole video on my channel just talking about the CRBA. So what is it? Now, the CRBA is one of those unique things where a child that's born outside of the U.S. to a U.S. citizen parent that has had physical presence in the U.S. for 5 years can automatically get their citizenship, even though they have never stepped foot in the U.S. That is a great process that is specifically for children of U.S. citizens. This means that the parent that is given citizenship to their child has to have been a U.S. citizen before the child is born. I have had people ask me, well, I got my citizenship a week after my child was born. Can I give them citizenship? In this situation with the CRBA, the answer is no. However, I am going to talk about other ways that you can give that child that was born a week after you got your citizenship. So let's leave that for later. Now, if you meet all the requirements, meaning you're a U.S. citizen, you have 5 years of physical presence in the U.S., and 3 of those has to be after the age of 14. And you have documentation to show all those 5 years, your child is under the age of 18. So if you meet all the requirements for a CRBA for your child, then you can complete a CRBA application online. Some embassies allow you to do it on paper, but there's specific instructions for that. So make sure that you are following the instructions for each embassy that you need to fill that CRBA application for. Now, with a CRBA application, you need the child's birth certificate. You need proof that you were in the country with the child's other parent when that child was conceived. Yes, you do. And then you need documentation to show your physical presence in the U.S. If you were married to the child's other parent before they were born, you want to include that marriage certificate as well. So once you meet all the requirements, include all of those documents with your CRBA, you will fill out the forms online, send it off to the embassy, then follow the embassy's instructions on how to schedule an appointment. So some embassies will allow you to schedule the appointment right online through the CRBA process. However, there are embassies that will tell you, please do not schedule through this online scheduling. Email us with your information and we will schedule you for an interview. So when it comes to the CRBA, you need to meet the requirements and you have to follow the instructions that that embassy gives you. All of this takes place at the U.S. Embassy where the child resides. The child never has to touch foot in the U.S. for you to complete this process. Part of the CRBA, once it's approved, you can also apply for a US passport for your child. Typically, I like to indicate that we will be filing that US passport application, have the application ready for the parent when they go to their interview so that the US passport can be processed at the same time as the CRBA. So that is a way that a US citizen parent can give citizenship to their child that is born outside of the US while the child is under the age of 18. Now let's talk about the situation where the child is born before the parent becomes a US citizen, or the parent did not have 5 years of physical presence in the US yet for that citizenship to be done through the CRBA. What can the parent do? In those situations, there is not an automatic acquisition of citizenship. The child can derive citizenship, but that requires them to come to the US. So one of the two ways of doing this is through an N-600 application. In order to qualify for an N-600 application, the child must be in the US in permanent residency, meaning they already have their green card. They entered the US and they either entered with their green card or they later on got their green card before they turned 18. Okay, that's really important. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about in this video requires the child to be under the age of 18. That's why that bonus tip on how to do it for a child over 18 is so crucial. Now, when the parent is a US citizen after the child was born, but the child enters the US before they turn 18 and enters with permanent residency or later on gets permanent residency in the US before they turn 18, now we look at the parent. Does the parent have legal and physical custody of the child? It's really important to note with the N-600 that you need that legal and physical custody because USCIS does want documentation showing that the child lives with the parent and the parent has legal rights over the child. Meaning, if there is a custody order, that the parent has either shared legal custody or sole legal custody. And then when it comes to physical custody, it's either you have sole physical custody or 50-50 custody. If you just have visitation with your child, that is not going to count for the physical custody aspect of this. So it's really important that when you are thinking long term about potentially giving citizenship to your child, you want to make sure that that custody arrangement allows you to eventually be able to give citizenship to your child. Now, just because you have it on your custody agreement that you have 50-50 custody, physical custody, does not mean that USCIS is just going to believe you. You will need to show proof that you actually had that child in your home. Okay, so having sole custody, having sole physical custody on paper without the child actually living with you does not help you at all. So it's really important that you understand that when it comes to the N-600, when it comes to the legal and physical custody requirements, USCIS actually wants proof that that child lives with you. So we've been able to show this in the past by showing school transcripts or school records for a child, showing where they reside, and it matches where the parent that is trying to give them citizenship resides. So it's really important that you are not only keeping records of your physical presence in the US, but also the child's physical presence in the US and their residency with you as their parent. In order to qualify for the N-600, one, the child must meet all of the requirements before they turn 18. First requirement, the child must have permanent residency in the US. Secondly, the child must be in the legal and physical custody of the US citizen parent at some point before they turn 18. And of course, goes without saying, that parent has to be a US citizen before the child turns 18. Once the child meets all of these requirements, the parent can file this application for them if they are under the age of 18. But if they're over the age of 18, the child can file this application for themselves. Now, I know I say 18 is the key word here, But let me explain. The child has to meet all the requirements before they turn 18, but they do not have to apply for the N600 before they turn 18. They can apply for it at any point in their life as long as they already met that requirement before they turn 18. Because guess what? Once you meet all of those requirements, you are a US citizen. You just don't have proof of it. So it's really important to note the difference when it comes to the N600 and the CRBA. Finally, let's talk about the third way that a US citizen parent can give citizenship to their child. And this is a unique one because if the US citizen parent does not meet the requirements, the grandparents can actually be used to meet the requirements. So let's talk about it. The N600K is unique in two ways. One, the child has to reside outside of the US, and the physical presence requirement for the US citizen parent can be either met by the US citizen parent or their US citizen grandparents. So this is very unique to the N600K. The first requirement is that the child have at least one US citizen parent. The second requirement is that the child must have a US citizen parent that has 5 years of physical presence in the US. Now, back to the uniqueness of the N600K. If the US citizen parent cannot meet this requirement, the grandparents may be able to use their physical presence to make up where the US citizen parent is lacking. The child must reside outside of the US, and the US citizen parent must have legal and physical custody of the US citizen child. Now, the definition of legal and physical custody is going to differ, and the requirements are going to differ. However, you want to make sure that you have that legal and physical custody. You are the one taking care of your child. That's basically what it comes down to. And then the biggest requirement that, trips people up when it comes to the N600K is that the child has to temporarily and lawfully be in the US while they go to their N600K interview. The final requirement for the N600K is that the child must enter the US lawfully and maintain lawful status until the N600K is approved. The N600K requires an interview with USCIS, which means the child must enter lawfully for their interview and remain in the US lawfully until that N600K is approved. Okay, once it's approved, they can apply for their US passport, get their passport, and they can choose to leave the US again because now they're US citizen and can reside anywhere in the world without threat of losing their citizenship. So those are the three ways that a US citizen can give citizenship to their child born outside of the US. Now, let's talk about the bonus, right? I talked about it. I mentioned it at the beginning. Let's talk about it. With the CRBA, right, you meet all the requirements for the CRBA. However, you didn't know about actually filing a CRBA until your child is already over 18. Or you're the child and you're already over 18. However, your parent met all the requirements, you met all the requirements, but you just didn't know that you had to file a CRBA, or they didn't go ahead and file a CRBA for you. What can you actually do? Once you're over the age of 18, but you met all the requirements for the CRBA, you can no longer apply for a CRBA, right? We know that because you have to apply for a CRBA before you turn 18. But what you can apply for is a US passport. Yes, you can. So with a US passport, you can go ahead and apply with the US Embassy where you're located with all the proof that you meet the CRBA requirements, and that officer will be able to review your documents and decide if you are in fact a US citizen. And if you are in fact a US citizen, they can go ahead and approve your application for a US passport. But here's one thing you need to know. If you lose that passport and you want to apply for a new passport, you have to go through that process all over again. Unless you come into the US and apply for an N600. So an N600 is a way to get that proof of citizenship and have a certificate of citizenship that you can use forever, that is now on record with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, that would be on record for the Social Security Administration, and all of that. So if you are in that boat where you're already over 18, you can apply for a U.S. passport with proof of your parents' U.S. citizenship and proof that they met all the requirements for the CRBA. It is recommended that once you're in the U.S. with your U.S. passport, that you then apply for a certificate of citizenship, so that every single time you apply for a U.S. passport, you are not having to present all the documents again for your CRBA. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please go ahead and hit the like button. Share this video with someone that may find it helpful. And if you are in a situation where you need to apply for a CRBA, an N600, or an N600K, or you are that US citizen child that just doesn't have proof of your citizenship, feel free to schedule a strategy session with me. My office can definitely help you with every single step of the way. And you can do that by going to my website, lilylegal.com, click on contact us, and you'll be able to pick a date and time that works best for you for us to talk about your situation.